Racing through the street to her dream IT internship, Maya, a sharp black college student, suddenly freezes. A little girl in a yellow dress is secretly flashing the SOS hand signal behind a stranger's back. Risking everything, Maya steps in to save her, only to discover the child is the daughter of Julian Vance, the icy, single-dad CEO of her new company. Now she's caught in a corporate war. Where are you listening to this story from? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Monday morning arrived in Seattle exactly as it usually did, draped in a low-hanging canopy of grey and smelling fiercely of roasted espresso and wet asphalt. The drizzle was not a storm, but a persistent, mist-like rain that clung to everything it touched. In the heart of the tech district, umbrellas bloomed like dark, hurried mushrooms along the sidewalks. The city moved with a quiet, expensive hum, a place where multi-billion-dollar algorithms were written behind walls of blue glass. Through this damp machinery of the city moved Maya Jackson. She was 22 years old, a senior at the University of Washington, and currently moving at a pace that suggested she was already late for the rest of her life. She was a striking black young woman with dark, tightly coiled hair pulled up into a messy bun that defied the dampness. She wore a crisp white button-down shirt tucked into tailored black trousers, an outfit carefully selected to project competence. But there was a particular tension in her shoulders, a coiled, kinetic energy born from growing up in the city's South End, where situational awareness wasn't a corporate buzzword, but a daily survival requirement. It was the precise posture of someone who held a black belt in Krav Maga, someone who trusted her own hand significantly more than she trusted the world around her. Strapped securely to her back was a tactical-grade canvas backpack. It was heavy. Inside it sat a heavily modified 6-pound laptop that was currently running hot against her spine. It wasn't just sitting idle. Deep in its terminal, executing lines of code over a localized interface, a ghost sweep algorithm was actively running. It was an automated script Maya had built entirely by herself, silently pinging, analyzing, and mapping vulnerabilities in the public network nodes that blanketed the downtown blocks as she walked. It was a massive undertaking, a localized network topography map she had intended to present as her opening move to the senior engineering team today. Today was her first day as an intern at Vanguard Systems, the most quietly powerful AI and security technology firm on the Western Seaboard. She was currently exactly 4 minutes behind schedule. If she missed the 8 a.m. security orientation, her internship would be instantly revoked. If the internship was revoked, the corporate-sponsored scholarship that paid her exorbitant university tuition would dissolve. Her entire trajectory, her escape velocity from the neighborhood that had tried to keep her down, hung on, closing the 6 blocks between herself and the towering glass lobby of Vanguard. She stopped at the intersection of 4th and Pike. The pedestrian light bled a blurry, commanding red through the mist. The crowd massed at the curb, a silent collective of commuters staring at their phones or the flashing walk signal across the street. Maya stood completely still, controlling her breathing, calculating the exact seconds it would take to sprint the remaining distance without arriving completely out of breath. Then the crowd shifted, and she saw them. A man in a sharp, charcoal-grey wool suit was walking briskly through the crosswalk, cutting aggressively against the flow of the waiting pedestrians. He was gripping the wrist of a young girl. The man had the broad, stiff posture of someone attempting to project absolute authority, but there was a frantic, uncalibrated rhythm to his stride. He was moving too fast for a father running late, and too forcefully for a guardian. Maya's eyes, trained for years to dissect environments and identify anomalies in fractions of a second, dropped from his expensive tailored jacket to his shoes. The leather was scuffed, but more importantly, the heels were severely and unevenly worn down to the wood. It was the footwear of a man who spent a lot of time pacing nervously on hard, unforgiving floors, completely at odds with the $1,000 suit he was wearing. The wealth was a costume, the anxiety was real. The girl he was pulling along was perhaps 6 years old. She wore a bright yellow dress that seemed entirely out of place in the monochromatic, rainy Seattle morning. She was incredibly small, delicate, with blonde hair that looked as though it had been brushed in a severe hurry by someone who didn't know how to care for it. She was not crying. She was not throwing a tantrum or dragging her feet in the way a tired child might. Instead, her body was completely rigid. She was creating a physical drag coefficient that forced the man to pull harder, her small frame locked in a state of absolute terror. But it was the girl's left hand that stopped Maya's heart from beating in its normal rhythm. The girl had her hand tucked firmly behind her back, hidden entirely from the man dragging her forward. She was holding her hand open, the small palm facing the oblivious crowd of commuters waiting at the light. Then she tucked her thumb into her palm. A second later, she folded her forefingers down over the thumb, trapping it tight. Then she opened her hand and did it again, thumb tucked, fingers closed, over and over, a silent, mechanical repetition. It was the universal international hand signal for domestic violence and extreme distress. SOS, help me. It was something taught in women's shelters and self-defense seminars. It was not something a 6-year-old child did by accident. The pedestrian light clicked to green. A digital voice announced it was safe to cross. The crowd surged forward in a unified wave of black umbrellas and raincoats. Maya stood entirely still on the curb. She had exactly 12 minutes to reach the Vanguard lobby. Her scholarship, her degree, her carefully engineered future, all of it existed on the other side of this intersection. She looked at the girl. The girl's eyes, wide and remarkably blue, met Maya's for a fraction of a second through the parting crowd. There was no chaotic panic in them, only a profound, terrifying expectation that absolutely no one was going to help her. It was the look of someone who had already calculated her own odds and found them hopeless. Maya adjusted the heavy straps of her backpack. She stepped out of the crosswalk, breaking away from the herd, and turned left, following the charcoal suit. The internship no longer mattered. The complex algorithm running silently in her backpack no longer mattered. The day had suddenly violently reduced itself to a very simple equation of right and wrong. She tracked them half a block down Pike Street before the man veered sharply into a narrow alleyway wedged between a closed bakery and an imposing concrete parking garage. It was a severe tactical error on his part. Alleys provided temporary concealment from the main street, but they also entirely removed escape routes and pedestrian witnesses. Maya didn't run. Running made noise. She closed the distance with the silent, rolling step she had practiced thousands of times on the canvas mat, keeping her weight balanced and her center of gravity low. The alley smelled thickly of wet cardboard and old grease. About 30 feet in, the man stopped to adjust his grip on the girl's wrist, cursing quietly under his breath in a voice that was entirely wrong for the suit. It was thin, ragged, vibrating with a high wire tension that signaled severe unpredictability. He turned his head to check his blind spot. He saw Maya. "Take a walk, lady," he snapped. He squared his shoulders, trying to use his size to fill the narrow space. Maya didn't stop. She didn't speak. She didn't issue a warning, ask a question, or project a threat. She understood the geometry of violence significantly better than he did. Words only gave the opponent time to brace, to process, and to react. She had spent 5 years learning to remove uncertainty from physical confrontations as quickly as possible. She applied that knowledge now with a focused economy that left no room for performance. She closed the remaining 10 feet in 3 rapid, explosive steps. The man realized a second too late that she wasn't turning around. He let go of the girl's wrist and reached quickly into his jacket, a universally recognizable telegraph for drawing a concealed weapon. He was far too slow. Maya didn't throw a traditional punch. She didn't have the size advantage, so she engineered a mechanical one. She pivoted heavily on her left foot, unbuckled the chest strap of her tactical backpack in one fluid motion, and swung the entire canvas bag off her right shoulder. 30 pounds of textbooks, heavy hardware, and a solid-state laptop running a ghost sweep algorithm became a dense, kinetic pendulum. She drove the massive momentum of the bag directly upward and into the side of the man's head and neck. The impact sounded like a heavy, wet sack hitting a solid concrete wall. The man's equilibrium shattered instantly. His eyes rolled up as the sheer force scrambled his inner ear. As he stumbled sideways, deeply disoriented and entirely unable to deploy whatever he had been reaching for in his coat, Maya stepped firmly into his space. She grabbed his extended right arm, controlling the wrist and the elbow at the joint, a textbook Krav Maga lock, and applied a sharp, decisive, downward torque. It was not a throw. It was a redirection so precise that the man's own staggering forward momentum, combined with the sudden displacement of his center of gravity, became the mechanism of his own descent. The man in the charcoal suit hit the wet, grease-stained pavement face first. He went entirely limp and did not move. Total time elapsed from the moment she entered his personal space. 4 seconds. Maya didn't look at the man on the ground again. She released her hold, stepped back, and picked up her heavy backpack by the reinforced top handle. Her breathing was steady, her heart rate elevated but entirely contained. Inside the bag, the automated ghost sweep algorithm continued to silently catalog local network nodes, entirely undisturbed by its brief, violent use as a blunt instrument. She turned to the girl in the yellow dress. The child had backed up against the rough brick wall of the bakery. She stared at the unconscious man on the ground, and then she looked up at Maya. She still didn't say a single word. Instead, the little girl took 2 deliberate steps forward and wrapped both of her small arms tightly around Maya's right arm. She pressed her face directly against the crisp, pristine white cotton of Maya's shirt. Maya looked down. The little girl was trembling violently, vibrating with the delayed shock of what she had just endured. A faint smudge of alley dirt transferred from the girl's cheek to the white sleeve of the shirt, staining the fabric, but Maya didn't pull away or try to brush it off. She simply stood still, shifted her heavy bag to her other hand, and placed her free palm gently on the back of the girl's head, smoothing the messy blonde hair down once. "I've got you," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying absolutely no heat or panic. "Nobody's going anywhere." At the mouth of the alley, the sudden flashing red and blue lights of a Seattle Police Department patrol cruiser painted the wet brick walls in harsh, alternating colors. A siren barked once, short and sharp, cutting cleanly through the morning drizzle. The police had arrived, and Maya's day had officially and permanently broken from its tracks. The soaring atrium of Vanguard Systems was a cathedral of modern technology, constructed entirely of brushed steel, white marble, and heavily tinted blue glass that filtered the Seattle morning light into a cold, clinical glow. Maya Jackson stepped through the revolving doors exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes late. The heavy canvas backpack slung over her shoulder felt even weightier now, anchoring her to the reality of what she had just lost. The police station procedures, the endless statements, and waiting for the traumatized little girl's frantic father to arrive had consumed her entire morning. She hadn't even stayed to meet the father. Once the child was safe in the arms of a social worker and the police assured her the suspect was in custody, Maya had sprinted the remaining blocks to the Vanguard Tower, hoping against all logic that someone would listen to reason. She approached the intern reception desk, pulling her massive 6-pound laptop from her bag to access her digital onboarding QR code. The moment the device's wireless card authenticated with Vanguard's public guest Wi-Fi, the terminal window running her custom ghost sweep algorithm flared to life. Lines of code cascaded rapidly down the black screen, halting abruptly on a flashing red anomaly. Maya frowned, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was a ghost data packet, a highly encrypted, anomalous stream of information silently piggybacking on the guest bandwidth, transmitting outward from the company's secure internal servers to an untraceable external IP address. It was a sophisticated digital bleed, an invisible heist happening right under the nose of the Western Seaboard's top cybersecurity firm. Maya quickly logged the packet's metadata, but before she could trace the exit node, a sharp, unyielding voice shattered her concentration. "Miss Jackson, I presume?" Maya looked up. Standing before her was Brenda Sterling, Vanguard's Director of Human Resources. Brenda was a woman in her late 50s who looked as though she had been manufactured rather than born. She wore a stiff, beige pencil-skirt suit that allowed zero room for error, and her hair was lacquered into an immovable ash-blonde helmet. Brenda possessed the cold, calculating eyes of someone whose entire existence revolved around enforcing corporate compliance, a woman who fundamentally lacked the capacity for empathy. "Yes, ma'am, I can explain the delay," Maya started, closing her laptop and slipping it back into her bag. "There was an emergency involving the police." "Vanguard Systems does not deal in excuses, Miss Jackson. We deal in metrics," Brenda interrupted, her voice a flat, condescending drone. She looked Maya up and down, her gaze snagging with visible disgust on the prominent dark smear of alley dirt marring the crisp white fabric of Maya's shirt, a souvenir from the violent takedown of the kidnapper. "You are over 2 hours late for the most competitive internship program in the state. Furthermore, your appearance is entirely unkempt and unprofessional. This is not a community college cafeteria. Your internship is hereby revoked. Security will escort you out." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. The corporate scholarship, her tuition, her one ticket out of the South End, all of it dissolved into the cold marble floor. She took a slow, deep breath, her Krav Maga training kicking in to keep her heart rate steady even as her world collapsed. She nodded once, refusing to give Brenda the satisfaction of seeing her beg, and turned toward the glass exit doors. Suddenly, the hushed ambience of the lobby was violently disrupted. A phalanx of broad-shouldered security personnel in earpieces pushed through the main entrance, forming a protective wedge. Behind them scurried a flock of anxious senior executives, holding tablets and speaking in hushed, frantic tones. But the absolute center of gravity in the room was the man walking in their midst. Julian Vance, the 34-year-old CEO of Vanguard Systems, moved with the predatory, effortless grace of a man who owned the air he breathed. He was a notoriously ruthless figure in the tech industry, a prodigy who had built an empire on cold logic and uncompromising standards. He wore a bespoke, midnight blue suit that screamed billion-dollar valuation, the tailoring flawless across his broad shoulders. But as Maya glanced back, she noticed a jarring contradiction. The flawless executive armor was betrayed by his face. Julian's jaw was tight with an agonizing tension, and his eyes were bloodshot, hollow and haunted, the raw, jagged exhaustion of a father who had just spent the most terrifying 2 hours of his life believing he had lost his only child. Holding his hand, walking slightly behind his long strides, was a little girl. She was still wearing the bright yellow dress. It was Chloe. Maya froze, her backpack halfway onto her shoulder. The executives swarmed around Julian, demanding his attention on stock fluctuations and PR statements, but Julian seemed completely deaf to them, his eyes fixed blankly ahead. Brenda Sterling immediately abandoned Maya, smoothing her stiff beige suit, and hurried forward with a sycophantic smile to greet the CEO. "Mr.
Vance, we are so glad you are back, sir," Brenda began. But Chloe didn't look at Brenda. The little girl's wide blue eyes swept across the vast lobby and locked onto the tall, black young woman standing near the exit. Chloe saw the messy, curly bun. She saw the heavy backpack. And most importantly, she saw the dark smudge of dirt on the sleeve of the white button-down shirt.
Chloe violently ripped her hand out of her father's grasp. Ignoring the startled shouts of the security detail, the 6-year-old sprinted across the polished marble floor. She crashed into Maya's legs, wrapping her tiny arms around Maya's knees in a desperate, vice-like grip, burying her face into the dark trousers. The entire lobby went dead silent. The executives stopped talking. The security guards froze, hands hovering near their holsters, unsure of how to proceed without traumatizing the boss's daughter. Julian Vance stopped dead in his tracks. The terrifying, icy CEO persona evaporated in a single heartbeat. He stared at his daughter, who hadn't let anyone but him touch her since the police had brought her back, clinging to this stranger. Then his exhausted eyes moved slowly up to Maya. He took in her youth, her steady posture, and finally the dirt smeared across her white shirt. The police captain had given him a brief description of the anonymous civilian who had shattered a kidnapper's jaw with a laptop bag and vanished before the paperwork could be filed. Julian bypassed his security detail and walked directly toward Maya. Brenda Sterling, misinterpreting the situation entirely, rushed forward, her face pale with horror. "Mr. Vance, I apologize. This girl is a terminated intern who showed up hours late looking like a vagrant. I am having her removed immediately." "Shut up," Julian said. He didn't even look at Brenda. His voice was dangerously quiet, cold enough to freeze the ambient moisture in the air. Brenda snapped her mouth shut, looking as if she had been slapped. Julian stopped 2 feet away from Maya. Up close, Maya could see the microscopic tremors in his hands. He looked at the dirt on her sleeve, not with the disgust Brenda had shown, but with profound, overwhelming reverence. It was the dirt from the alleyway. It was the physical proof of her violent intervention. "You're the one," Julian whispered, the words carrying a heavy, unguarded weight. "You're the one who stopped him." "She signaled me," Maya said simply, her voice steady, looking directly into the eyes of the billionaire. "She was brave. I just did the math on the situation." A ghost of a reaction, something between a laugh and a sob, flickered in Julian's chest. He looked down at Chloe, who turned her head just enough to press her cheek against Maya's leg, her small hand reaching up to grip Maya's white shirt. Julian looked back at Maya, his expression hardening, back into the authoritative mask of a CEO, but with an entirely new focus. "You said she was a terminated intern?" Julian asked, his voice echoing in the silent lobby, finally acknowledging Brenda without looking at her. Sir, yes. She missed orientation. Company policy dictates." "Company policy no longer applies to her." Julian cut her off, his tone absolute and unquestionable. He looked back at Maya, his eyes entirely devoid of the ice that usually characterized him. "What is your name?" "Maya Jackson." "Maya Jackson," Julian repeated, testing the syllables. "You are no longer an intern. Effective immediately, you are my special assistant and senior data analyst. You answer to no one in this building except me." He turned to his stunned executive team. "Clear my morning schedule. Maya, bring your bag. You're coming with us to the top floor." Without waiting for a response, Julian gently placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. Chloe finally let go of Maya's leg, but immediately reached out, intertwining her small fingers with Maya's hand. As Brenda Sterling stood entirely paralyzed in her beige suit, Maya tightened her grip on her heavy backpack, the one hiding a ghost data secret Vanguard desperately needed to know about, and let the CEO of Vanguard Systems and his daughter lead her toward the executive elevators. The 50th floor of Vanguard Systems was a pressurized ecosystem of silence, wealth, and relentless efficiency. Maya Jackson's new workspace was a sleek, minimalist glass desk, positioned strategically right outside the CEO's double doors. It was a gatekeeper's throne, and Maya occupied it with the vigilant posture of a soldier. She had subtly rearranged the heavy monitors so her back was to the wall, giving her a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the private elevators. Old survival habits from the South End died hard, especially when the stakes had escalated to the corporate stratosphere. Working directly under Julian Vance was like trying to domesticate a storm. To the outside world, Julian was a ruthless, calculating machine, a brilliant mind devoid of human frailty. But sitting just a few feet away from him for 10 hours a day, Maya quickly deciphered the truth behind the armor. He was not a machine, he was a man drowning in hypervigilance. Ever since his wife had passed away 3 years ago from a sudden aneurysm, Julian's entire universe had shrunk down to one fragile point of gravity: Chloe. The recent kidnapping attempt had shattered his remaining illusions of safety. Consequently, the workaholic CEO's schedule had become a chaotic, fragmented mess. He was skipping multi-million-dollar acquisition meetings to personally monitor the security feeds of the building and cancelling international conference calls just to ensure Chloe's lunch was tested for allergens. Maya took it upon herself to bring order to the chaos. Within her first 3 days, she ruthlessly optimized his messy calendar, color-coding his itinerary, filtering out non-essential executive noise, and carving out strict, uninterrupted blocks of time for him to actually breathe. Her sudden, unexplained ascension from a delayed intern to the CEO's right hand did not go unnoticed. The executive floor bristled with resentment. Leading the charge was Marcus Thorne, the senior vice president of operations. Marcus was a tall, excessively groomed man in his late 50s with slicked-back silver hair and the patronizing smile of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. He wore aggressively expensive cologne and possessed the petty, territorial soul of a middle manager.
"Miss Jackson," Marcus drawled one afternoon, leaning against her glass desk with a stack of files, eyeing her simple white blouse and dark trousers with undisguised disdain. "I'm sure whatever administrative parlor tricks you perform to get this desk are fascinating, but the grown-ups need these quarterly projections approved by Julian. Try not to lose them among your intern notes." Maya didn't even look up from her dual monitors. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Mr. Vance is currently in a high-priority structural review, Mr. Thorne, and judging by the fact that your Q3 projections are relying on outdated latency metrics from last year's server patch, I'm actually doing you a favor by not showing this to him."
"You have until 4 p.m. to correct the data on page 12. Have a nice day." Marcus's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He snatched the files back and stormed off. Maya merely took a sip of her coffee and went back to work. She had dealt with street corner hustlers who were far more intimidating than men in $3,000 suits. While the executives fumed, Chloe thrived in the new arrangement. The little girl in the yellow dress was now a permanent fixture on the 50th floor, as Julian flatly refused to let her out of his sight. She spent most of her time sitting cross-legged on a plush rug right beside Maya's desk, armed with an immense box of crayons. She rarely spoke to the other staff, but she chattered endlessly to Maya about colors, clouds, and the stray cats she saw from the window. On Thursday afternoon, Chloe stood up and placed a piece of thick construction paper on Maya's keyboard. "For you," Chloe whispered. Maya looked down. It was a crayon drawing of 2 figures. One was a tall girl with brown skin, a massive scribbled bun of curly hair, and a bright red superhero cape billowing behind her. The superhero was holding hands with a stiff, grey, boxy figure that had antennas on its head. "I love it," Maya smiled softly. "I'm the superhero, I assume. Who is the grey guy?" "That's Daddy," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "He's a robot. He never sleeps and he forgets how to smile. But the superhero is teaching him." Maya felt a sudden, sharp ache in her chest. She looked through the glass walls into Julian's office. He was pacing frantically, a phone pressed to his ear, his free hand rubbing the back of his neck in pure exhaustion. He really was a robot running on depleted batteries. Maya carefully took a magnetic pin and hung Chloe's drawing right on the edge of her primary monitor. "We'll make sure he remembers how to smile, Chloe." "I promise," Maya said quietly. But smiling was not on the immediate agenda. As the week progressed, the days belonged to Julian and Chloe, but the nights belonged to the ghost in the system. It was 2 a.m. on a Friday. The Vanguard Tower was entirely empty save for the security patrols. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle skyline was a sea of glittering, silent lights. Inside, the only illumination came from the glowing screens on Maya's desk. In the dark office, complex lines of neon green code scrolled rapidly upward, reflecting perfectly in Maya's dark, focused eyes. She was hunting. Ever since she had caught the anomalous ghost data packet in the lobby on her first day, Maya had been quietly running a localized backdoor trace. It was incredibly dangerous. If Vanguard's internal security caught her, she would be arrested for corporate espionage. But she knew the security team's blind spots better than they did. As her decryption algorithm finally cracked the packet's outer shell, the truth spilled across her screen in a terrifying cascade of data. This wasn't a minor data leak. Someone was systematically siphoning the source code for Vanguard's next-generation core AI, the very technology the company's entire market valuation was based upon. And the data was being routed to an offshore server heavily affiliated with their biggest market rival. Maya's fingers flew over the keys, cross-referencing the access logs. The ghost packets were bypassing the firewall using a Level 1 executive clearance. It was an inside job, a high-level mole. But the most chilling discovery came when Maya pulled up the timestamps of the data transfers. She aligned them with the police report from Monday morning, the exact time of Chloe's attempted kidnapping. The green code reflected in her widened eyes as the puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. The kidnapper in the alleyway hadn't demanded a ransom. The police had found no burner phones, no ransom notes, no escape vehicles prepared for a long haul. It had never been about money, it was psychological warfare. There was a massive emergency board of directors meeting scheduled for early next week to discuss a hostile takeover bid. The mole didn't just want to steal the AI, they wanted Vanguard entirely. And the only thing standing in their way was Julian Vance. The kidnapping was orchestrated to break Julian's mind, to push an already grieving paranoid father over the edge of sanity. They wanted him to show up to the board meeting as a shattered emotional wreck, forcing the shareholders to demand his immediate resignation due to mental instability. Maya leaned back in her chair, the silence of the 50th floor suddenly feeling oppressive and heavy. The man who had ordered the hit on a 6-year-old girl was currently sitting somewhere in this very building, waiting for Julian to collapse. Maya looked at the crayon drawing of the superhero and the robot pinned to her monitor. Her jaw tightened, her Krav Maga instincts flaring to life, transforming from physical defense to digital warfare. They were trying to destroy a father to steal an empire. She wasn't going to let that happen. The sprawling grid of Seattle spread out below the 50th floor windows, a shimmering blanket of amber and white cutting through the persistent Pacific Northwest mist. Inside the executive suite of Vanguard Systems, the silence was absolute. It was 11 p.m. on the Sunday night before the emergency shareholder meeting, a corporate tribunal designed by the board to strip Julian of his CEO title. At her desk in the dim outer office, Maya Jackson hit the final keystroke. The decryption algorithm she had been nursing for days finally cracked the deepest layer of the ghost data's security protocols. The screen flashed, bypassing the proxy servers and revealing the origin point of the data theft. A high-resolution ID badge photo materialized on her monitor. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The mole wasn't Marcus Thorne, the abrasive VP. It was David Vance. David was Vanguard's chief financial officer and, more significantly, Julian's paternal uncle. David was a man in his late 60s who actively cultivated an aura of avuncular warmth. He typically wore tweed vests beneath his bespoke suits and possessed the gentle, grandfatherly smile of a man who always remembered secretaries' birthdays. He looked like the kind of man who baked pies, not the kind of man who orchestrated the psychological torture of his grieving nephew and the kidnapping of his own grandniece. But the digital footprint was undeniable. David was the one siphoning the core AI source code, planning to sell Vanguard out to a rival tech giant the moment Julian was ousted. Maya printed the unredacted logs. She grabbed the stack of papers and the large, greasy cardboard box of pepperoni pizza she had ordered an hour ago and pushed open the heavy oak doors to Julian's office. Julian was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette stark against the glowing Seattle skyline. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie hours ago. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tense forearms. He looked entirely depleted, a king waiting for the siege engines to breach his walls in the morning. "I told security to send the delivery driver away," Julian murmured without turning around, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I intercepted him in the lobby," Maya said, walking over and unceremoniously dropping the cardboard pizza box right in the center of his custom-milled $10,000 Italian glass desk. The juxtaposition was jarring, but Maya didn't care. "You haven't eaten since yesterday, and we have a massive problem." Julian finally turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in the serious set of her jaw. He walked over to the desk, ignoring the pizza, and looked at the papers she slid toward him. "What is this?" "It's the ghost in the system," Maya said softly. "I traced the data leak, and I traced the timeline of the alleyway incident." Julian read the top page. His eyes, usually so sharp and impenetrable, widened in a horrifying realization. He read it again. The silence in the room stretched, becoming thick and suffocating. When Julian finally looked up, the betrayal had fractured something deep inside him, but within seconds, the icy, calculating CEO forcefully sealed the cracks. The heartbreak was instantly replaced by a terrifying, absolute coldness. "My own uncle," Julian whispered. "He used Chloe. He used my daughter to break my mind." "He's expecting you to walk into that boardroom tomorrow morning as a broken man, Julian," Maya said, leaning against the edge of the glass desk. "He expects you to fold. So we don't just defend, we go on the offensive. We give him a taste of his own medicine." For the next hour, the two of them mapped out a lethal corporate counterstrike. Maya would rig the boardroom's presentation network to intercept David's final data transfer, which he would inevitably try to execute during the chaos of the vote. They would trap him in a digital cage of his own making, broadcasting his treason to every shareholder in the room. When the plan was finally locked in, the adrenaline slowly began to recede, leaving behind a quiet, heavy intimacy in the vast office. They sat on opposite sides of the glass desk. Maya opened the pizza box. The slices were completely cold now, the cheese stiff and unappetizing, but Julian took a piece anyway, chewing methodically. "Chloe's mother used to do this," Julian said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. He was staring at the cold pizza but looking at a memory. "Whenever I was working myself into the ground, Elena would show up with cheap food and force me to sit down. When she died, the silence in my house became unbearable. I threw myself into building this company's AI just so I wouldn't have to listen to the quiet, and I squeezed Chloe so tight I almost suffocated her. David knew that. He knew exactly where to press to make me shatter." He looked up at Maya, his expression stripped of all corporate pretense. "Why did you follow him into that alley, Maya?" "You had everything to lose. You didn't know us?" Maya picked at the crust of her pizza, looking out at the city lights. "I grew up in the South End," she said quietly. "If you saw someone in trouble, you didn't look away, because the cops usually didn't come in time. You had to be your own first responder." She offered a small, wry smile. "When I was 12, 3 high school seniors tried to steal my little brother's bicycle. I didn't have a tactical backpack back then, so I hit the biggest one with a frozen turkey my mum had just bought for Thanksgiving." Julian blinked, processing the image. "A frozen turkey?" "Knocked him clean out," Maya nodded, her eyes glinting with amusement. "The other 2 ran. My mum was furious because the turkey hit the pavement and we had to eat meatloaf for Thanksgiving, but my brother kept his bike. That's why I took up Krav Maga. I figured learning how to punch properly was cheaper than ruining holiday dinners." A low sound rumbled in Julian's chest. It took Maya a second to realize what it was. Julian Vance was laughing. It was a rusty, quiet sound, but it was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes and smoothing the harsh lines of stress around his mouth. It was the smile Chloe had drawn on the robot. In the quiet, illuminated expanse of the 50th floor, surrounded by the cold machinery of corporate warfare, the distance between the billionaire CEO and the intern from the South End vanished. They were just 2 people who had learned to fight the darkness in their own ways, finding an unexpected grounding solace in each other before the storm broke. The Vanguard Systems boardroom, located on the 49th floor, was a theater of polished mahogany, panoramic views, and suffocating tension. The emergency shareholder meeting was in full swing. At the head of the long table sat Julian Vance, his posture impeccably straight, his expression an impenetrable mask of ice. Opposite him, standing with an air of practiced, sorrowful reluctance, was David Vance. The CFO had draped himself in the role of the tragic, concerned uncle perfectly. He adjusted his tweed vest, projecting a grandfatherly warmth that sharply contrasted with the venom of his words. "Gentlemen, it breaks my heart to say this," David addressed the room, his voice heavy with feigned grief. "But recent events have clearly compromised Julian's ability to lead. The kidnapping attempt on little Chloe, thank God she is safe, has understandably shattered him. We cannot allow his personal trauma to sink Vanguard's market valuation. I propose an immediate vote of no confidence." The shareholders murmured, exchanging uneasy glances. Julian did not interrupt. He simply reached out with terrifying calmness, picked up his crystal glass, and took a slow, deliberate sip of filtered water. He was waiting for a signal. 50 floors below, in the subterranean depths of Sub-Level 3, Maya Jackson was preparing to send that signal. The Vanguard central server room was a cavernous freezing chamber dominated by the deafening mechanical hum of industrial cooling systems. Aisle upon aisle of massive black server racks stood like silent monoliths, their status panels casting an eerie, rhythmic red LED glow across the metallic floor. Maya crouched in the shadows behind the primary mainframes, her fingers hovering over a ruggedized maintenance terminal. She had already bypassed the physical security locks. Now she waited. The heavy steel doors hissed open. 3 men stepped into the freezing room. Leading them was Krieger, a massive, scarred mercenary with a brutal square jaw and the cold, dead eyes of a veteran contract killer. He was the man David had hired to orchestrate the kidnapping and now the final data heist. Flanking him were 2 equally imposing enforcers, built like brick walls and armed with suppressed tactical pistols. They moved with silent military precision toward the central terminal, plunging a customized decryption drive into the master port. Maya didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, executing the lockdown sequence she and Julian had designed the night before. Instantly, the ambient lighting shifted. The steady blue indicators on the server racks flared into angry, flashing red LED alarms. The cooling fans roared into overdrive as she isolated the network. "Bandwidth locked, transfer denied," the automated system announced. Krieger cursed violently, ripping the useless drive from the port. His dead eyes snapped toward the shadows where the terminal keystrokes had originated.
"Find her," he barked. The 2 enforcers fanned out, guns raised. Maya knew she couldn't outshoot them, so she changed the environment. She grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall bracket, pulled the pin, and hurled it across the slippery anti-static floor. It slammed into the shins of the first enforcer, sending him crashing down in a tangle of limbs. As the extinguisher spun, spraying a blinding cloud of white chemical foam into the narrow aisle, Maya lunged. She utilized the thick white smoke as cover, closing the distance with the second enforcer before he could aim his weapon. Using her Krav Maga training, she deflected his gun hand upward, pivoted sharply, and delivered a devastating elbow strike to his throat, collapsing his windpipe. He dropped instantly, but Krieger was faster, older, and far more lethal. The massive mercenary lunged through the foam, abandoning his firearm for a serrated combat knife. He slashed horizontally in a brutal arc. Maya twisted backward, but the blade caught the outer edge of her left arm, slicing through her white shirt and tearing into her flesh. A sharp, burning pain erupted, but the South-End survival instinct overrode the agony. She didn't retreat. Instead, Maya grabbed a thick, heavy bundle of industrial Cat6 network cables dangling from an overhead tray. Using it like a makeshift whip, she swung the dense cord violently, wrapping it around Krieger's knife wrist. With a sharp, whole-body pivot, she yanked the cables, pulling Krieger off balance, and drove her heavy combat boot directly into his shattered knee.
As the giant man fell bellowing to the floor, Maya dove over him, slid across the slick tiles to her terminal, and slammed her bleeding, shaking hand onto the Enter key. Back in the 49th floor boardroom, Julian Vance gently set his water glass down. A sharp ping echoed through the room. Suddenly, the massive presentation screens behind David Vance flickered. The quarterly financial charts vanished, replaced by a devastating cascade of undeniable proof. Bank transaction records, offshore routing numbers, encrypted emails between David and Krieger, and the audio recording of the kidnapping contract all blared across the displays in high definition. The boardroom erupted into stunned chaos. David froze, the color draining entirely from his face as the grandfatherly mask shattered into a portrait of absolute terror. He stared at the screens, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Julian stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. The icy CEO had returned, absolute and unforgiving. "You are right about one thing, David," Julian said, his voice cutting through the uproar like a scythe. "The company is compromised, but not by my trauma." He gestured toward the heavy wooden doors. 2 FBI agents, whom Julian had quietly stationed in the antechamber an hour earlier, stepped into the room. "David Vance, you are hereby stripped of all titles and shares, effective immediately," Julian stated with terrifying finality. "Take him out of my sight." As the FBI moved in to arrest his uncle, Julian looked down at his tablet. A small green text bubble from Maya appeared on the screen, signaling her success, allowing Julian to finally let out a quiet breath. The Vanguard medical clinic on the 10th floor was as pristine and sterile as the rest of the building, smelling faintly of sharp antiseptic and expensive lavender hand sanitizer. Dr. Aris, a semi-retired trauma surgeon who now served as the corporate physician, a slender, grey-haired man with kind, tired eyes and a slow, methodical bedside manner born from decades in emergency rooms, was finishing the last sutures on Maya's left arm. Maya sat on the edge of the examination table, her ruined white shirt discarded and replaced by a loose grey Vanguard athletic hoodie she had draped over her shoulders. Despite the sharp, persistent sting radiating from the knife wound, her right hand was resting on the keyboard of her heavy laptop, which was balanced precariously on her knees. Doctor. Aris secured the white gauze with medical tape, softly advising her to avoid heavy lifting before politely stepping out of the room to file the official incident report. Left entirely alone, Maya typed the final command sequence into her terminal. With a decisive strike of the Enter key, her custom ghost sweep algorithm, now fully integrated and aggressively upgraded, was officially deployed into Vanguard's primary mainframe. A wave of green confirmation notifications cascaded down her black screen. The new, impenetrable security lattice was activated, locking down the entire corporate network against any future external or internal threats. Vanguard was safe. The clinic door clicked open and Julian Vance stepped inside, tightly holding Chloe's hand. The transformation in Julian was staggering. The impenetrable, icy CEO persona that had terrorized boardrooms and dictated market trends had entirely evaporated. His tie was gone, his suit jacket left somewhere on the 49th floor, and the rigid defensive tension that had defined his posture for the past 3 years was completely absent. He looked exhausted, yet profoundly lighter, as if a crushing physical weight had just been lifted from his chest. Chloe, still wearing her bright yellow dress, immediately released her father's hand and ran across the sterile room. She didn't tackle Maya's legs this time, minding the visible bandages, but instead carefully climbed onto the metal step of the examination table and wrapped her small arms gently around Maya's uninjured side. Maya leaned her head against the little girl's messy blonde hair, breathing out a long sigh of genuine relief. Julian walked over, stopping just inches from the edge of the examination table. For a long moment he didn't say a single word. He simply looked at the heavy white bandages wrapped tightly around Maya's forearm, his jaw clenching with residual guilt. Slowly he reached out. Maya braced herself for a flare of pain, but Julian's touch was incredibly gentle. His large, warm hands carefully adjusted the edge of the medical tape, smoothing it down over her skin with absolute precision. The heat of his fingers was a startling, comforting contrast to the cold sting of the wound and the sterile chill of the clinic. When he finally looked up, his eyes were entirely unguarded, brimming with a deep, overwhelming vulnerability and a profound gratitude that corporate vocabulary could not adequately capture. Then, for the very first time since she had met him, Julian smiled at her. It wasn't the polite, calculated smirk of a businessman, nor the weary, brief chuckle of a stressed father sharing cold pizza. It was a genuine, breathtaking smile of a man looking directly at a woman he deeply admired and cherished. Beside them, Chloe reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of thick construction paper. "I fixed it," the little girl announced proudly, smoothing the paper out over Maya's laptop keyboard. Maya looked down at the familiar crayon drawing. It was the same picture from the other day, the black superhero with the curly bun and the red cape, standing next to the grey, boxy robot. But Chloe had added a crucial, brand-new detail. The robot was no longer standing rigidly with its arms by its sides. Instead, the robot had reached out, and its stiff, mechanical hand was now gently, securely holding the superhero's hand. Maya felt a sudden warmth bloom in her chest, a quiet joy entirely eclipsing the throbbing in her arm. She looked up from the crayon drawing to meet Julian's intense gaze. "The FBI took David away," Julian said quietly, his voice a low, comforting rumble in the quiet room. "The board is stabilized, and your new security algorithm just locked down the entire grid."
I saw the network confirmation ping on my phone. He paused, his thumb lightly brushing the soft sleeve of her borrowed hoodie. "You don't have your degree yet, Maya, but your internship is officially over. Vanguard needs a head of cybersecurity. I need you. The job is yours, effective immediately."
"And whatever you need to build your department, whatever fights you need to pick, I promise you, I will always be the wall at your back." Maya looked at this powerful, brilliant man, and then down at the little girl leaning happily against her ribs. She didn't need to run a tactical equation on this situation. Outside the clinic window, the relentless Seattle rain had finally stopped. The thick, grey clouds were breaking apart, allowing the late afternoon sunlight to spill across the city and illuminate the towering spire of the Space Needle in a brilliant wash of gold. Maya closed her laptop and slid it into her heavy canvas bag. "I accept the position, Mr. Vance," she said, a playful, bright smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "But my first official demand as a department head is that we leave this building right now and get some real dinner. No cold pizza." Julian's smile widened, reaching his eyes as he gently took the heavy backpack from her good arm, slinging it over his own shoulder without a single word of protest. "Steak!" Chloe declared loudly, grabbing Maya's right hand, while Julian stepped to her left. Together, the three of them walked out of the clinic, leaving the cold corporate battlefield behind as they stepped into the warm, golden evening light of the city. The story of Maya and Julian teaches us a beautiful lesson about courage, trust, and the invisible threads that connect us all. Maya was willing to sacrifice her own future and dreams to save a little girl she did not even know. Julian, trapped in his grief and paranoia, had to learn how to open his heart again and trust the goodness in a stranger. In our daily lives, we are often just like Maya at the crosswalk, rushing toward our own goals, stressed about being late or falling behind. But sometimes life pauses us. It asks us to look around and notice the silent cries for help from the people around us. A small act of kindness, a moment of bravery, or simply choosing not to look away can change the world for someone else. You never know when your compassion might be the exact miracle another person has been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and loved ones to spread this message of hope. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts, and please subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you more inspiring stories. May God bless you and your family abundantly. May He give you the courage to always do what is right, the strength to protect the vulnerable, and the grace to heal from past wounds. If you believe that true kindness always wins and that love can mend a broken heart, please type Amen in the comments below. In the